Hello you lovely lot, my name is Max, welcome back to my YouTube channel and another Nottingham Forest match preview. Today discussing our upcoming home game against the current reigning and defending Premier League champions Manchester City. This one could be a little bit ugly, so if you are new around these parts, these videos go as follows. We start by providing some context to our opposition, we then talk about their stats and their key players in a little bit of detail. We then follow that up by talking a bit about their tactics and then giving an overall score line prediction. So if you do enjoy this kind of stuff, don't forget to drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel and ring that notification bell whilst you're down there. With that being said, let's start talking about Pep Guardiola and Manchester City. So as we usually do, we will be kicking this video off by providing some context to the season thus far for Manchester City. And of course, if you take a look at the Premier League table, you could very easily deduce that it's been another great season for Manchester City, sitting top of the pile at the time of recording on goal difference ahead of Arsenal. But when we go below the surface, it has actually been quite a difficult season for Manchester City thus far, both on and off the field, having lost some quite high profile matches already this season, including against Manchester United in the Manchester Derby and against their perennial bogey team, Tottenham Hotspur, of course, back a couple of weeks ago, and that has led to them losing already more games this season than they did throughout the entirety of last season. And it's hard to put your finger on what's been the singular issue for Manchester City this season, and for my money I think it's a combination of several factors, including fatigue, injuries, Pep just being Pep and having a little tinker here and there with his team, and of course the quality of the Premier League generally being better this season compared to seasons gone by. However, one of the teams that they didn't struggle against this season, very nice segue there, is Nottingham Forest, of course smashing us at the Etihad 6-0 back in August. In fact, that 6-0 loss is our heaviest defeat, I think, since 2005 when we lost 6-0 to Ipswich in the Championship. By far the heaviest defeat we've suffered since Steve Cooper took charge of the team. And the stats and numbers of that game in a little bit more detail make it look very much a resounding win for City. To give you some context as to how poor that performance was for us and how good they were, they took 17 shots compared to our 8, had 9 on target to just 1 from us, and City generated 3.84 expected goals over the course of the 90 minutes, the most we've shipped in a single game in the Premier League this season. So before this gets any more morbid, let's move into the stats in a little bit more detail and talk about what has made Manchester City tick this season, what's been good and what's been bad. So as we usually do, we'll start by talking about their attack in a little bit of detail. As you would expect, it has remained at a very high level compared to the other Premier League teams in the league this season, having scored the most goals, generated the most expected goals, and taken the most shots per 90 at around 16. It is worth noting though that these numbers are down quite significantly off this time last season. Their expected goals is down off this time last season, and they're taking around 2 or 3 shots less per 90 minutes compared to this time last season. Of course, you can make the argument that with Erling Haaland in your team, you just simply don't need to create as many chances as they were last season. He is by far and away one of the most clinical forwards in Europe at the moment, and that would explain why, despite the fact that they're taking less shots, they've scored a similar amount of goals, and their expected goals isn't miles off what it was at this time last season. But I think it is definitely a cause for concern in terms of the fact that they're not blowing teams away as often as they were last season and in seasons gone by. There's a lot of nuance when it comes to talking about Manchester City at the moment, whether they're a better or a worse team with Erling Haaland in it, or whether they are generally a better team than they have been historically so far this season. I'd be really interested to know your thoughts on that in the comment section down below. So drop me a comment, let me know what you think, and I'll get back to you. One area where there is very little debate as to whether they have stepped back or not is in the defence. Manchester City by far are a worse defensive side this season than they have been historically under Pep Guardiola. 23 games into last season, Manchester City had the best defensive record in the Premier League. They had conceded 14 goals from 15 expected goals 23 games into the season, and we're conceding around 6 shots per 90 minutes. When we flip that over to this season, they've conceded 23 goals in 23 games from an XG of around 26 and are conceding around 8 shots per 90 minutes. Now, of course, a Premier League side on track to win the title this season, conceding about a goal per game, is nothing particularly unsettling. It's what teams 20 years ago more or less were doing, but when you compare it against the lofty heights of what Manchester City have done over the last 2 seasons in particular, it really shows quite a significant drop-off defensively defensively, where they've gone from an elite world-class defensive side to just a very good defensive side. And I think when looking at the causation for something like this, a drop-off like this, I think there's 3 or 4 reasons as to why you can make the argument they have dropped off, or you could justify these numbers. The first one is that simply the numbers they've been putting up in the last couple of seasons have been unsustainable. I think that's probably the most realistic one. Another argument could be that Ederson is having a poor season, which we'll get into in a bit. The numbers certainly support that potential argument. And the third and fourth are potentially linked. Firstly being that Pep just likes to tinker with his side. He's never really had a settled 11 over the course of the season. And the fourth one kind of dovetailing off that with a lack of continuity in defence. We've seen Stones, Laporte, Diaz, Walker, Ake, Gomez. Everyone's played in defence so far this season, and that lack of continuity has led to them being a little bit disjointed at the back. And I mentioned in that previous section that we were going to talk about Ederson and his numbers, and he's not having his best shot-stopping season. When you take a look at his numbers in the hood of keepers to have played over 1,000 Premier League minutes this season, he's got the 3rd worst save percentage and the 5th worst post-shot expected goals per 90, showing he's not really making the saves that you would expect him to make, nor is he really adding value to the side with the saves that he is actually making. Of course, when you're looking at Ederson, you're not really looking at his shot-stopping, you're looking at the other tangibles in his game, his distribution, his command of the box, his ability to help his team build out from the back, and obviously for those metrics he's at very high lofty levels. He's one of the best in the world in terms of distribution. And of course it is also worth noting that Manchester City concedes some of the highest value, highest quality shots in the Premier League, just like Liverpool do, because obviously they're a team that are renowned for suffocating the opposition, dominating possession. When they do get turned over, teams generally try to make the most of the opportunities that they do have. And of course, whilst you can lay the blame at the feet of Ederson slightly for the underperformance defensively, there are other factors at play, like we've discussed in sort of throughout this section. Now, we've already got into detail quite a lot on the stats and the data and all that kind of stuff, and we already know who the key players are for Manchester City. It's obviously the likes of Haaland, De Bruyne, etc. So instead of going into the key players, I want to spend some time talking about the tactics and some of the small little nuanced changes that Pep's made to try and extract the most out of the players that he has, that in the short term have hindered the team ever so slightly. So we're now on the tactics board. We've got Manchester City up in the light blue. We've got us up in the red in their respective formations, certainly on paper. We talked about in our previous meeting with Manchester City, which if you've not seen, I'll leave it up in the iCard so you can go check it out, about how it looks like a 4-3-3. We talked about the positional play and build up and all that stuff. I'm not going to go into too much detail about that. I more want to talk about the changes that they've made in this system. So when you look at Manchester City historically and the way in which they've built up, it's been in a 2-3 and then a 5 sort of shape up front. That has been the conventional way in which Manchester City have built up in their matches this season and sort of in seasons historically. In recent matches, however, we've seen a slight tweak tactically to the build-up shape, looking a little bit more like a 3-2-5 shape, with one of the fullbacks, instead of tucking in the half space alongside the defensive midfielder to create that block of 3, going into the back line to offer a little bit more protection to the back line. So instead, it looks like a 3-2, and then of course that 5 up front, which has more or less stayed the same. In some matches, it's actually been a 3-2-1-4, where there's been a player playing just behind that front 4 of players, and I think that's to offer a little bit more cover in the midfield, a little bit more penetration from these deep areas. Of course, with the wingers that they have in Mahrez and Grealish, they're not the most athletic wingers. They're not going to stretch defensive by getting in behind, so having that extra body who can maybe pick the pass to the likes of Haaland and Alvarez, who can stretch defenses, does offer that little bit of different attacking dimension. But this is why we're seeing Bernardo Silva line up as a left back for Manchester City. Defensively, he does fall into that left back slot, but in possession, you'll quite often see him being the guy tucking in alongside Rodri and sort of offering that double pivot looking shape, whilst Kyle Walker is the guy tucking in on the right hand side. And actually, we've seen Rico Lewis do this as well. This is where he's really come into this Man City team and looked really good, is doing this sort of Bernardo Silva tucking in alongside the defensive midfielder role. And this slight tweak, again, I'm not an expert, this slight tweak in looking how they build up certainly looks like it's been to the detriment of the City side. And it's also led to them conceding a lot more goals. I don't know if that's necessarily a product of this, but when I look at this City team, that double pivot, and when I look at someone like Bernardo Silva, for example, he isn't the most active player defensively. Even for a forward, he's one of them players who looks really busy. He does a lot of running, covers a lot of ground, sort of puts himself about. But when you look at his numbers in a little bit of detail, he doesn't really do that much defensive work when you play him as a midfielder, when he's playing alongside Rodri, even adjusted for possession. And it gives Rodri quite a huge task to do so much defensive work. When they do have a player sort of alongside Rodri in this position, when they're building up in a 2-3-5 shape, they have that little bit extra presence in the midfield, that ability to cover a little bit more ground. When they play the 3-2-5, when the fullback tucks in alongside the defence, it gives Rodri a lot more work to do defensively. And whilst I think he's actually probably been the best defensive midfielder in the league this season alongside Casemiro, he's struggled in games and he's looked outrun in certain games, especially against teams that have the energy to sort of find those spaces and those pockets that they can pick up. And so that's why I think personally, looking at Nottingham Forest in this squad, we could actually have an opportunity to cause this City team some damage. If they continue to go with this 3-2-5 build-up shape in possession, we've been playing quite a narrow and congested 4-4-2 diamond, 4-3-1-2, 4-3-3 kind of shape, where we've got the split strikers in Brennan, and it's been Surridge, it's been Wood, obviously Gibbs-White playing in the pocket, and then quite a narrow and compact centre of midfield. They do come out into the wide areas, but they can compact that central zone, and City have been very reliant on progressing through these central areas. You could imagine we could cause them some problems if we can really stay nice and compressed, don't give them too much, maybe come up a little bit, just not give them the space in these areas where they can sort of find the pockets. And obviously the players are wanting to funnel into these central areas, and obviously if we can then get our strikers maybe pressing up onto this sort of double pivot over here of Rodri, and assuming it's Bernardo Silva or Rico Lewis, whoever's playing alongside him. I'm not explaining it very well, but I think there's an opportunity there in terms of the shape that we have to sort of congest the central areas against City, put pressure on their sort of build-up players, Rodri and whoever's he's playing alongside, and maybe causing some problems by transitioning high up the pitch with the energy we have in our forwards and causing them some problems. I think that means we probably need to start Surridge in this game rather than Chris Wood, even though we've just forked £15 million for him on a permanent deal. But maybe it could provide fruit. Maybe we'll get battered 6-0 again. Who knows? With Pep and with City, it's really unpredictable. You don't really know what you're going to get with them. He could completely throw a curveball and just do something very normal and functional to get over the line in this game. But it really depends, and we could see any side of the City team. So I feel like that's quite an appropriate way to end this video and discuss the scoreline for this match. Again, you don't really know what you're going to get from the City team at the moment. Pep has been so fixated on tinkering with certain aspects of his team to try and maximise the output of his side, and it has left certain players looking frustrated. Bernardo Silva's playing in a position he probably doesn't really want to be playing in. Haaland has looked to try and receive from direct opportunities, but they're playing too slowly and too intricately, and it has left this City team, like I say, really hard to predict. I still think they will beat us. I think that's a pretty uncontroversial thing to say. I think it's pretty obvious that they'll pick up the 3 points, or certainly it's weighed in their favour. I think we will fare better though than we did in the reverse fixture at the Etihad. I do think we'll keep it down to maybe a 2-0 or a 1-0. I think it'll be a lot tighter. I think we'll cause them a lot more problems on the break because we've looked a lot more functional and better when we transitioned in recent weeks than we have sort of at the beginning of the season when we were still sort of finding our feet in the league. So yeah, I'm going to go for a 2-0 to City, but I think we need to give a good account for ourselves, and I think we will. I think we'll work our socks off, compress the space, and not make it easy for them. Maybe it's a penalty or, a scrappy goal. If we can keep it to something like that, I think we should be, pretty happy with ourselves, because against teams like City, you never really expect to beat them. It's more, if you don't concede too many, it's a bonus. So that's my thoughts on that. Of course, though, let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Apologies for a bit more of a rambly video. Like I say, it's hard to predict this City team, and I've tried to approach it from every angle conceivable, really. If you did enjoy it, drop a like on this video, subscribe to the channel, and ring that notification bell whilst you're down there. And of course, let me know your thoughts on this match in the comment section as well. And with that being said, thank you so much for watching. Enjoy the game if you are going Reds. I will catch you later.